I would say that I think Artangel's always embraced the fearlessness of artists. And Jeremy Deller, with whom we worked on this amazing performance project and film called The Battle of Orgreave, said something very simple and nice about our work, which is that he always felt that Artangel has the backs of the artists that we work with. And I think that is what we want to do. So we, as I say, we're open to the boldest, the most unusual, unexpected ideas from artists. And we embrace that. And we want to realize those fearless ideas in the most uncompromised way possible.
I mean, that's absolutely right, James. And I think we can talk a lot about the things that have changed, but that's something that's never changed. The way we work with artists, the openness with which we approach conversations, the fact that we will pretty much do anything to realize an artist's vision, however long it takes, that we don't start with a plan, the plan emerges. And that kind of way of interacting with artists has been the same since we began.
And, obviously that sort of fearlessness begins, with the artist dreaming and imagining. It might start off in the studio, but at a certain point, with the projects we make, it rubs up against, the conditions and the circumstances of the world in which we're working. And that's our kind of real work, to sort of negotiate that relationship between these amazing ideas and the environments in which they need to be realized, and just to try and sort of find the best possible way of moving it from an idea to something which people can experience here or there. And we're sort of, we've always been at odds with the predictable, really. It's not been our we're just not so interested. We're much more interested in ideas that surprise us, challenge us, and we think could grow into something, amazingly new and different.
ICA was very different then. It was quite anarchic in some ways. There were not very many staff. There was a feeling there that you could do what you wanted as well. So there was a sort of liberating feeling, but of course the space defined the work. Although towards the end of our time at the ICA, I began to work in other spaces because I was working more in performing arts then. So I already found I was outgrowing the black box theatre, but that, our backgrounds are in visual arts and performing arts, but over the years that's changed, and I think we're less defined by art form practice. A lot of the projects we've done, James mentioned the Battle of Orgreave, which you can't define as a performance or a film. It is its own, it sets its own terms. And I think more often than not, we've tried to create hybrid events that can't be boxed in or pigeonholed into some art form.
I think when we were working at the ICA in London, it still thought of itself as a place for the artistic vanguards of the time to find a home. And I think when we were there, the avant-garde had already sort of embraced, this is the history of modernism, if you really, it already embraced a diversity of materials. If you think from collage and montage onwards, and a diversity of forms, sculpture and certain forms of performance, had changed hugely, by the 1970s, the 1980s, when we were there. Then I think that what we were involved in, as Michael had started it already at the ICA, was this exploration of a diversity of places. So if you have diversity of materials first, then diversity of forms, and then diversity of places and a diversity of voices. And it seemed that to us that needed to be explored outside of the white walls of the gallery or the black box of the theatre.
I mean, in some ways, Artangel is like an independent production company, run along the same lines as an independent production company for films. You know, producers tend to make things from the ground up. They tend not to work with pre-existing, you know, kind of material.
I would say that, you know, when we're having these conversations with artists, which is really actually about, well, what is the most important idea that you have, which you would like to realize over the next few years? You know, sometimes the idea of duration is implicit in that conversation. So working with Ronnie Horn in Iceland to make the Library of Water, it was always, you know, it is a project about time, actually, to some extent about the changing climate through the medium of these, you know, bodies of glacial water as a barometer of these changes. So it was felt absolutely right that this should be what we call a long-term project, that it would not have been meaningful as a 3-month or a 1-year project. And, you know, not dissimilarly with Mike Kelly. I mean, Mike Kelly's project in Detroit was not about time in such a way as Ronnie's was, but it was about creating a situation through the form of a sculpture which could then be housed and reused by different communities over a long period of time. So again, it didn't make sense to think of that as a temporary project. It's temporary when the mobile homestead goes on tour around Greater Detroit, but it's long-term in its home in downtown Detroit. And, you know, Michael could talk about our longest long-term project, which was conceived for the turn of the millennium.
Yeah, I mean, James is referring to Long Player, which needs a span of 1,000 years in order to take place in. So Jem Finer, having read all about the sort of celebrations for the new millennium, which lasted one night, felt that he wanted to create something that played out over 1,000 years. And it's a piece of music called Long Player, which is composed originally, the source material is composed on instruments, Tibetan standing bells, that are themselves 1,000 years old. And a software program at the moment combines and recombines the elements of the source material so that the work continues and doesn't repeat for a 1,000-year period. And we're now, of course, in the year 22. Long Player, since then, has become more than a piece of music. It's actually an opportunity to think in the long term, to apply ideas to long-term planning in different spheres of public life. And it's also, in recent years, become something that climate communities and activists have begun to be interested in as a paradigm for long-term thinking. So again, we didn't know all of this when we set out on the road of Long Player in 1999, at the end of that year. It's evolved as the music has evolved, and it's created new meanings along the way.
If we want to pick up on this theme of the weather and climate, I mean, it is something which we very actively and consciously embraced over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's manifest in London by one of our current projects called 1,000 Words for Weather, which is a an installation by the writer Jessica J. Lee and the composer Claudia Molitor in a Senate House library as part of the University of London. And a kind of new and very invigorating alliance that Artangel was closely involved in helping to build, called the World Weather Network, which was launched in June of 2022. Will run initially for a year, where there are it's an alliance of 28 like-minded arts organizations in every continent, all of whom have taken on responsibility to create their own, what we call weather station, where sort of artists and writers and filmmakers are making their own reports on the local weather, which come together on, you know, a new platform, World Weather Network. So it's absolutely on our minds at the moment.
I mean, that's an unusual example of a project that began with a theme, with an issue. We've never really done that before. We've allowed themes to emerge. And 25 years into our leadership of Artangel, we put together a talk which we did called No Fixed Address, where we chose 25 different materials which somehow define the work we've been doing. And again, looking at it in retrospect to see whether themes would emerge. Those materials began with obvious ones like concrete, but ended up with much looser materials such as the family. And we realized that we'd spent a lot of time on projects that dealt with family of one kind or another. So the materials we'd worked with, the themes that were produced, were not conscious at the time. We had an opportunity to think about Reading Prison, which was empty, and we were made aware of it, and it was a great opportunity to make a kind of strange equivalent of a group show. It involved writers, it involved performers, it involved many different artists, different cells, different wings. So it's an animation of an empty but perfectly preserved Victorian prison.
The moment that we first walked into and through the empty Reading Prison, it made such a powerful impact on us. You know, to be in this claustrophobic penal environment, just it weighed so heavily on your body, and you know, to as we did soon afterwards, read Oscar Wilde's extraordinary piece of writing, De Profundis, which he wrote when he was, you know, in isolation in his prison cell, just meant we had to try and make it happen. And it was a big job of persuasion, because it actually involved persuading the Ministry of Justice, Her Majesty's Ministry of Justice, to give us the keys to the prison. And what was remarkable is that was actually, you know, we talked about the duration, the long incubation of many of our projects. Actually, this one had to come together very quickly. So we had a window of opportunity to get into Reading Prison. And it was amazing how every artist and writer whom we approached responded with just incredible commitment to make work in a few months. I mean, ranging from, you know, Wolfgang Tillmans and Marlene Dumas and Nan Goldin to writers like Anne Carson and Jeanette Winterson and Gillian Slovo. I mean, a great range of writers. You know, it was an opportunity not to be missed. You know, we sort of love it when a project happens and it starts to create its own magnetic pull. And that's what happened at Reading Prison. I mean, I think the empty prison itself already exerted a certain curiosity particularly for people who lived in Reading, which is a town about 30 miles from London, who lived with this looming presence, near the city centre, but unless they were an inmate or a prison officer, had never had access to the interior. Then combined with Oscar Wilde is such a fundamental and still powerfully impactful figure for people in the sort of gay community, as well as obviously lovers of literature. So there were these combined forces which created this incredible magnetic pull. I mean, when we turned up the day of the opening, after there was already a queue kind of round the block at Reading Prison, we kind of like really took us aback. Well, it was a great sort of response to a piece of writing that we put by Oscar Wilde on the wall of Reading Prison, which said, "With books, freedom, flowers, and the moon, who could not be happy?"
I think the emotional aspect of the work has always been very important. I think that's what links quite a lot of what we've done. That it's actually very open, and there's a way in for the audience, because really the job of a producer, I guess, is to sort of be a bridge between an artist's idea and an audience's experience.
I think we've always enjoyed being surprised as the projects we're involved in unfold and they begin to take on their forms. So I'm looking forward to being surprised by what Artangel, under its new leadership, how surprised I'll be by the projects that they realize.
Yeah, I mean, we took a decision to step down some years ago, and because when you set off on a journey, you kind of improvise, you make it up as you go along, really. And when you come to the end of it, you have to plan it much more carefully. There's more responsibilities involved, and we talked a lot about it some two, 3 years ago, before we actually announced our intention. And then there's been a further year where we've been overlapping with Marianne, which has been very enjoyable. And it shows us how different Artangel is going to be, because the environment is different again. And we've talked a little bit in this conversation about the way each decade, the environment we were working in changed and presented new challenges. For sure, then the next 5 years, the next 3 to 5 years are going to be very challenging and will require a different kind of Artangel energy.